tell you that modern submarines are black for the same reason the tires in your car are black. That's right. But before the rubber meets the road, we need to talk about submarines and camouflage. Before the invention of nuclear power, submarines actually spent more time on the surface than underwater, and so camouflaging was essential. During World War I, the United States conducted experiments in order to protect their submarines against visual detection. The results showed that for a surface submarine, a light gray hull with black decks provided as good of a visual protection as any other method. But in the mid-30s, another issue arose, as it became apparent that submerged submarines can be observed by aircraft flying over them, as long as the submarines were not too deep down. Looking for a solution, the United States conducted another series of tests in 1937 at Pearl Harbor. As part of the experiments, submarines were painted black, dark blue, purple, green, and various other combination of colors. The conclusion was that dark blue offered the best concealment in deep, clear tropical waters, and the commander ordered his division to repaint the submarines dark blue. But as the camouflage testing continued, a new problem surfaced, as the blue paint deteriorated after application and acquired a lighter, milky tone. In the end, the decision to paint submarines black was made due to the superior durability of black paint, and not because of black color's camouflaging characteristics. Fast forwarding to 2006, the Royal Navy painted HMS Torbay a new shade called Steely Blue, as after conducting exhaustive trials and lab tests, they found out that black was the worst low-key color to deceive the enemy. While black color did perform in darker North Atlantic waters, in brighter seas, the new blue shade was twice as hard to spot. HMS Torbay was sent on a 6-month secret mission to test out this new color, and it was expected that the entire fleet of Royal Navy submarines would be repainted steely blue. But something must have been discovered during the testing of the steely blue shade, as the Royal Navy's newest Astute-class submarines are still blue. Here is a random fact. HMS Torbay was the first British warship to be controlled using Microsoft Windows operating system, which was the... I wonder if that's what steely blue looks like. Here comes the interesting part. It appears that most modern submarines are not painted at all. Instead, they're covered with anechoic tiles, which happen to be black. Anechoic tiles are predominantly made of rubber that contains thousands of tiny voids, which have two unique properties. They absorb the sound waves of active sonar, thereby reducing its effective range, and they also decrease the sound emitted from the vessel itself, like engine noises, which reduces detection range by passive sonar. Just to give you an idea about the sound absorption properties of the anechoic tiles, back in 2009, HMS Vanguard and French Navy's Triumphant were traveling at low speeds in the Atlantic Ocean. The anechoic tiles were so effective that neither submarine's passive sonar detected the other submarine, resulting in them colliding into one another. Anechoic tiles were first used by Germans as early as 1940 under U-boats. By 1970, Soviets started covering their submarines by 4-inch or 10-cm thick rubber tiles, and that helped reduce the Akula-class submarine's acoustic signature by 10 to 20 decibels. By the 1980s, both the Royal Navy and the US Navy started utilizing the anechoic tiles. But why are the anechoic tiles black? Answering this question is key to understanding why modern submarines are black. Anechoic tiles are typically made of rubber, but believe it or not, rubber's natural color is white. For instance, over a century ago, all the tires on cars were actually white, just like this Ford Model T. Which begs the question, if rubber is white, why are tires black? And it's time to say, it's not what you think. What makes tires black is the addition of carbon black to the rubber. Carbon black is often used as color pigment in paints, but tires are black, not for cosmetic reasons, but because adding carbon black to the rubber mixture increases the tensile strength and the road wear abrasion resistance of the tire by over 10 times. In fact, carbon black is mainly used as a reinforcing filler due to its unique property of making things more durable. And this is why all rubber products where tensile and abrasion wear properties are important contain carbon black, and thus are black in color. Carbon black is also the reason why black paint is much more durable than other colors. But we're not quite done with carbon black. Since a submarine experiences extreme pressure differences as it submerges and resurfaces, the anechoic tiles are under a lot of pressure, so using carbon black filler in the rubber mixture makes a lot of sense. Moreover, research shows that carbon black reinforced rubber has the best sound absorption performance when compared to rubbers that use other reinforcing fillers. While the exact composition of anechoic tiles used on submarines is not public knowledge, during our research of academic papers, we found that the amount of carbon black added to the mixture influences the tile's sound absorption properties. Since various parts of the submarine produce different sound frequencies, a variety of different anechoic tiles are attached to the different parts of the submarine. If you're interested in the research, check out the references in the video description. But one last question remains. If dark blue is the best camouflage color, why not paint the anechoic tiles dark blue? And also, why are the bottoms of some submarines red? Well, the exact details around the stealth properties of submarines are not publicly available. North Korea and Iran paint their submarines green, and Israel paints theirs blue. Go figure. But there might be a dilemma about painting submarines in general. If you paint the tiles, it seems to negatively impact the sonar stealth properties of the submarine. But if you don't paint them, organic life like algae and barnacles will slowly cover the bottom of the submarine, which over time has a similar negative impact. That said, if the bottom is to be painted, anti-fouling paint such as cuprous oxide is used, a red chemical compound which slows down the growth of organisms, which is why the bottom of submarines and ships in general is red. Oh, and the cruise ships are white or mostly white because that's the color that best reflects the sun's energy, keeping air conditioning costs to a minimum. This video was brought to you by the...
Het is 4 uur 's middags vandaag, klaar met werken, net zo'n kleine €800 verdiend. Je gelooft me niet? Laten we gewoon eventjes...
Why are most modern Navy ships painted gray and not red? But before you answer that, remember that there was a time when some Navy ships were painted white or even pink. Yeah, a pink warship. Above the waterline, ships are not painted red for the same reason that US Marines do not wear bright orange. Calling attention to yourself when others are seeking to destroy you is an exceptionally bad idea. But painting the underwater part of the hull red, that's a different story. So while the simple answer for why military ships are painted gray is reducing the ship's visibility, there are more considerations. Because gray is not necessarily always the best color to reduce visibility, but pink is. Well, sometimes. But before we talk about the pink pink ships, we need to understand a bit of history and nature to appreciate the colorful mess that we got ourselves into. Animals have been hiding themselves for hundreds of millions of years by blending into their environment. During the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar's scout ships were painted blush green to avoid detection. But it was the French who coined the term camouflage back in 1915 when they started to use it to conceal guns and vehicles. During World War I and II, the practitioners were known as camoufleurs, which consisted of artists, painters, and even zoologists, probably because of zebras, as you will see. But camouflage is not limited to just painting things. A classic example of camouflage was the Trojan horse that was made by the Greeks. Those soldiers camouflaged their way into the city of Troy after all, and this is called dynamic camouflage, and involves erecting a shroud which makes the object difficult to see or interpret. Other examples of dynamic naval camouflage include deceiving signals, Q-ships, and smoke screens to cover an attack. On the other hand, static camouflage is usually achieved by painting, which is the main focus of this video. When it comes to static camouflage in naval warfare, some camouflage makes a ship difficult to see, while others make the ship difficult to hit. During World War I, thousands of British and American ships were painted into dazzle camouflage. At the time, German U-boats sank numerous vessels, so something needed to be done. U-boats relied on periscopes to detect and fire at their targets. Dazzle made it more difficult for the enemy to estimate the ship's heading, range, speed, and identity. And this would deceive the enemy, causing them to take a poor firing position. A similar effect was accomplished by painting a bow wave, which, believe it or not, gave the impression that the ship was traveling faster than it really was. But I don't think it exactly works on cars. But did those complex geometrical shapes of contrasting colors actually work? According to an analysis done in 1918 by the Royal Navy, dazzled ships were attacked in 1.47% of sailings compared to only 1.12% of ships painted in plain colors. So could it be that dazzles actually had a negative effect? We need to keep in mind that the goal of adding dazzles was not to reduce the visibility of the ship, but to confuse the enemy into taking a poor firing position. That same analysis indicated that of the ships that were struck by torpedoes, only 43% of the dazzled ships sank, compared to 54% of the ones without camouflage. Furthermore, on average, dazzled ships were a lot bigger than the uncamouflaged ones, making them an easier target. All this seems to imply that it's harder to sink a dazzled ship. Even insurance companies gave discounts to ships painted with approved dazzle designs, which brings us to zebras. There must be a reason why zebras evolved with stripes on their skin. According to a 2019 study by University of Bristol and University of California at Davis, flies are more likely to land on a horse compared to a zebra. The scientific study concluded that zebras' dazzling stripes confuse the bejesus out of flies. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And this protects zebras from blood-sucking insects that spread disease. I empathize with those flies. Certain stripes confuse me too. By the way, we're giving away $50 Amazon gift cards to 5 lucky people who follow through this next bit on behalf of Guns of Glory, who sponsored this video. Guns of Glory is a steampunk-themed online strategy against studies and experiments on low visibility camouflage for ships. One theory was that since the sky is black at night, and it's night half the time, why not paint the ships black? And they did. But to the researchers' surprise, it was found that black was more visible even on the darkest nights compared to gray colors. And not to mention the fact that black ships would really stand out during the day like a strobe light would during the night. The same problem haunts most of the other colors like red, green, and yellow. So for a ship, there are 3 options to blend with the environment: the color of the water, the color of the sky, or the color of the haze over the horizon. For instance, it was found that during World War II, ships that were painted completely blue came under attack less often than the alternative color schemes. For this reason, ships in southwestern Pacific were painted dark blue between mid-1942 through 1945. Moreover, sailors were ordered to wear dungarees instead of white uniforms when on topside. A variety of gray colors were tested, including dark gray, light gray, and haze gray. Haze gray turned out to provide a reasonable level of concealment in the widest range of conditions. Gray color tones provide optimum concealment during overcast conditions and fog. In fact, after the end of World War II, the U.S. Navy adopted haze gray as the de facto standard for the U.S. Navy ships, which is still used to this day. Similarly, most other navies around the world use gray color schemes for their warships. It's worth noting, however, that while the sides of the ships is usually painted gray, the deck color varies from navy to navy. For example, Russians use gray, green, and red decks. Red decks are usually anti-fouling paint mixed with a little bit of a political statement. Americans paint their decks jet gray. The Royal Navy used a variety of colors through the years, ranging from dark green to dark gray. But to be clear, navies around the world use shades of gray not because it provides the best concealment. There are better options, and we're going to talk about it next. Throughout World War II, the U.S. Navy developed over 30 different measures in order to reduce visibility of warships, confuse the enemy, or to achieve both at the same time. The measures vary, from painting a ship in a gradient of different shades of gray to better blend with the horizon, to Measure 32, which emphasized mistaken identity and course deception in order to complicate submarine attacks. Overall, the measures varied for different classes of ships and the locations where the ships were deployed, say tropics versus northern latitudes. For instance, in the Pacific region, most ships were painted using Measure 32. While painting ships in different patterns of gray may decrease visibility even further than just painting the ship plain gray, the reality is there's no perfect color or pattern for all conditions. The sea and sky constantly change in color and lighting. Moreover, the condition of the horizon varies based on the weather, which brings us to the pink ships. In 1940, Lord Louis Mountbatten witnessed a Union Castle line ship disappear in a pinkish haze. So he ordered a flotilla of K-class destroyers to be painted in pink, which subsequently became known as Mountbatten pink. The reasoning behind this was that it was believed that the color would provide an effective camouflage during dawn and dusk periods. While its effectiveness was praised by anecdotal success, its effectiveness was also disputed by others. Several other destroyers and cruisers were painted pink in the Royal Navy. But how the first American ship ended up being painted pink was pure coincidence. USS Winslow was in dire need of a new paint job when she arrived at Cape Town, South Africa. But to the captain's shock, only pink paint was available. After much soul searching, we've all been there, the captain came to the conclusion that pink was better than what he had, and ordered the go-ahead. When USS Winslow joined the rest of the South Atlantic Fleet, Admiral Ingram was so impressed with the almost invisible USS Winslow during a pinkish haze that he ordered the rest of the force to be painted pink. But if you really want to reduce ships' visibility even more, you have to rely on counter-illumination. During World War II, the Royal Canadian Navy experimented with diffuse lighting camouflage. This involved installing a bunch of projectors around the ship that would project light onto the sides of the ship to make her brightness match that of the background. During experiments, this method reduced visibility up to 75%. The Royal Navy conducted similar experiments, where with the lights off, a ship could be seen from as far as 3 miles away, but with the light system turned on, the ship only became visible at 1.2 miles in the best-case scenario, nearly a 60% reduction. But this system was cumbersome. Also, by the middle of World War II, most Navy commanders realized that camouflage was largely unnecessary, given that the enemy could use radio direction finding, or submarines could use hydrophones. And then came radars, infrared cameras, and other sensors. You get the idea. This brings us to the modern day, when camouflage is largely unnecessary. Notice the keyword largely. Obviously, you don't want to paint a ship fluorescent yellow, but the color gray is just okay, as it works in a wide range of conditions. If reduced visibility was really the key factor in choosing the ship's color, then we would see more ships painted in various patterns, just like the US Navy's measures during World War II. Furthermore, you would expect those patterns to vary depending on the location that the ship was deployed to. But why paint a ship in various color shades when it really doesn't matter that much anymore? Just so you know, some navies still paint certain ships in camouflage patterns. For instance, the Swedish Visby-class corvettes and Skjold-class corvettes of the Royal Norwegian Navy, both of which operate in littoral waters. In 2013, the commander of the littoral ship USS Freedom convinced leadership to paint his ship in a World War II pattern called Measure 32. Many people saw this as a sign that naval camouflage was still alive. USS Freedom's camouflage pattern was to be tested during the ship's deployment, after which a decision would be made on whether to paint other ships in the class with Measure 32. But as of today, none of the other 9 ships have received the camouflaged look, and USS Freedom has been retired. American naval camouflage is dead. But what is not dead is haze gray, which keeps getting upgrades. In the 1990s, the US Navy developed a paint that reduced infrared signature by half while still maintaining a haze gray-like appearance. The benefits are both reduced radar cross-section and reduced infrared signature, which help increase the ship's survivability by improving decoy effectiveness. Besides Americans, the Royal Australian Navy decided to repaint their fleet with this new haze gray paint due to its infrared reflecting pigments. Some may point to HMCS Regina. I know what you're thinking, Regina. Rhymes with fun. And HMS Tamar that got camouflage paint jobs done recently, but it was done more for a PR stunt to commemorate the past, not because of its functionality. Many icebreakers are red, but not all of them. In the case of the Soviets and Russians, or even Canadians, you can probably guess why their icebreakers would be red. But why would Americans paint their 2 polar icebreakers red? We assure you, it's not because of America's love for communism or Canadian maple syrup. It all goes back to practicality. In daylight, it's much easier to spot a red and white hull from far away. So if you're in distress, you can see the icebreaker coming to your rescue. The white stripe also differentiates which end is the bow, so it's easier to see their heading. But American icebreakers used to have a white hull until the late 60s. There is a historical moment that triggered the switch from white to red. In 1969, the Esso tanker Manhattan transited the Northwest Passage to Prudhoe Bay to investigate the feasibility of shipping oil by sea versus constructing a trans-Alaskan pipeline. The Manhattan was accompanied by US CGC Northwind and the more capable Canadian Coast Guard ship John A. Macdonald. As you can see here, the hull of the Canadian icebreaker was red, while the American's hull was white. On several occasions, when the snow was blowing hard, the US Coast Guard helicopter could not visually locate their own icebreaker to land back on, and had no choice but to land on the Canadian icebreaker, which was much easier to spot. As a direct result of this experience, the US Coast Guard subsequently painted all their icebreaker hulls red, effectively joining the communists and the maple syrup lovers.
Fairchild Republic A-10 Lightning Bolt, or simply the Hog, is one of the most iconic planes in the US Air Force. A plane developed in the middle of the Cold War with a specific type of warfare in mind. If the Cold War turned hot, one area was destined to become a battleground. A 50-kilometer corridor of lowland valleys called the Fulda Gap, where any invading troops would be channeled on their march from East Germany to West Germany. It was the shortest route to France, Frankfurt, and the strategically important Rhine River. If war broke out, this corridor would be a vital region to secure, and each side of the Fulda Gap was defended by armoured divisions. To cope with this threat environment, The US developed an operational doctrine called air-land battle, and the A-10 was developed as a vital component of this strategy. A low-flying tank killer, which would work closely with the troops on the ground to break up enemy formations at the front, while high-flying bombers harassed the supply lines at the rear. The A-10 was a plane designed specifically for the role of close air support. Close air support is exactly that. Close. Close to friendly forces and close to unfriendly forces. It requires a plane to be capable of absorbing a great deal of damage as they come under fire and to be incredibly accurate with its weapons to avoid friendly fire. A plane with this role needs some unique qualities. It needs to be available at a moment's notice. In an ever-evolving battlefield, troops could need support without warning, and because of this, the plane needs to be nearby and ready to go. This means working from forward bases that may not necessarily have all the infrastructure and equipment that other planes need to operate. Its survivability needs to be best in class. Flying this close to the ground is going to result in every man with a weapon taking potshots at the plane. As a result, the plane needs to be capable of dealing with small arms, machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, and even missiles. A-10s frequently limp back to their base with damage so severe that they would have downed another plane, with parts of their wings ripped off, engine taken out, and hydraulics unoperational. And coming with this, the plane needs to be simple and cheap to manufacture. The Air Force made it clear from the beginning, in a battle of cost versus performance, cost would be prioritized. In an all-out war with the Soviets, quantity and ease of manufacturing was going to be a huge factor. Like the Sherman and the T-34 tanks, which were so influential in World War II, a future war between the Soviets and the US was expected to be won by whoever could out-manufacture and maintain their equipment. This plane was intended to be a cheap and rugged workhorse. It needed to be made with readily available off-the-shelf parts, so maintenance crews could easily interchange parts to repair damage quickly and at a low cost. Contractors bidding for the manufacturing contract needed to consider all of these factors and design the entire plane around the primary armament, which was chosen before the design process started, the General Electric GAU-8A, a gun whose sound is so recognizable it has become a meme. The gun takes up a significant portion of the plane's internal volume, at nearly 6 meters long, fitting snugly below the pilot. The largest part of the gun is the ammo drum, which typically holds 1,150 30mm rounds. The rounds are delivered to the 7 rotating barrels along a linkless chute system, which also pulls the shell casings back into the ammo drum after firing to prevent the expended shells from damaging the plane. The belt system and the rotating cam firing system of the barrels are both driven by a hydraulic motor, which is powered by 2 independent hydraulic systems on board. There are 2 separate hydraulic systems to ensure redundancy in operation, and both run the gun. The left and right hydraulic systems are pressurized by 2 identical engine-driven pumps on the left and right engine. If an engine is lost or one of the hydraulic lines is broken, then the controls powered by those hydraulics cease to work. However, the plane has been designed to allow it to continue flying on only one hydraulic system, as both elevators, both ailerons, and one rudder have hydraulic power after loss of either hydraulic lines, ensuring powered control of pitch, roll, and yaw, even after the loss of a single hydraulic system. If both are lost, the plane can switch to a manual reversion flight control system, where the controls can be operated without power assist, which is difficult to say the least, but it can allow the pilot to land the plane safely, or, at the very least, allow them to get into safe airspace to eject. This kind of redundancy can be found in every component of the A-10 to increase survivability. The landing gear is retracted by the left system only, but it can be extended by both, and in the event neither system is available, the wing-mounted landing gear doesn't actually retract all the way into the fairings, which allows the plane to land with landing gear retracted with only moderate damage to the plane. Protecting the control mechanisms through redundancy is just one component of increasing survivability. The fuel tanks are self-sealing on the lower portions and are filled with foam to prevent explosions. The A-10, like all planes, can't fly with significant armor covering every portion of the plane, so they just protect the most vital component on the plane, the stick operator, otherwise known as the pilot, who sits inside a titanium tub which is reported to be capable of absorbing direct hits from armor-piercing rounds up to 23 millimeters. The canopy is also made from ballistic glass, capable of taking hits from small arms, but this isn't the type of plane to be flying upside down over the battlefield. This is more for shrapnel from anti-aircraft fire and missiles. The A-10 also carries more chaff and flares than any US Air Force legacy fighter. Chaff is radar-reflective material which confuses radar-controlled missiles, while flares confuse heat-seeking missiles. With 4 dispensers located in the landing gear pods and another 4 on the outer wingtips, for a total of 16 across both wings, which can be triggered automatically by radar and laser detection systems on the nose and wingtips of the plane, or simply fired manually by the pilot. One of the most striking features of the A-10 is its strange engine placement and tail configuration, and this too was a design feature to thwart enemies with heat-seeking missiles. The engines and tail were arranged like this to mask the infrared signature of the hot exhaust of the plane, which could be used to lock onto the plane by IR missiles on the ground. The tail would look more at home on a World War II bomber, which were designed to be stable. Stability was an important part of the A-10's design. The large vertical stabilizers help keep the plane on target as it fires its insanely powerful gun. The gun is mounted directly on the center line of the plane to minimize the effect of the recoil pushing the plane off target. The recoil force at 44.5 kilonewtons is so powerful that it effectively halves the plane's forward thrust, as each of the A-10's General Electric T-34 engines produces just 41 kilonewtons of thrust, but the plane fires in such short bursts, typically 1 to 2 seconds, that the pilot doesn't need to worry about stalling. The high engines mounted behind the wings also reduce the amount of dirt and dust that can enter the engines from forward operating base runways, which can be just dirt runways. A lot of design choices were made to allow the plane to operate from remote airfields like this. Smaller military planes like this don't typically have auxiliary power units, which are small secondary engines that large planes like airliners have. You can see the exhaust of these little hidden engines in the tails of airliners. These engines allow the plane to start its main engines without external help, and help run functions like electricity generation and hydraulic fluid pumps. But it's unnecessary weight for most small aircraft, and they usually use some other way to get the engine spinning. Sometimes this results in the plane relying on ground equipment, which the A-10 cannot depend on, and so an APU was installed between the 2 podded engines. You can see the exhaust of the APU just underneath the nacelles here. Some of the most interesting design challenges arose from the sheer power of the aircraft's gun. The gun spits out so much burnt and unburnt propellant that they actually lost an early model in 1978 after exhaust gas from the gun ignited and starved the engines of oxygen. To deal with this, some design changes were made. First, a small gas scoop was placed underneath the barrels to suck in some of that exhaust. The chemical mixture of the round propellant was changed to increase the flash suppressant levels. This in turn caused secondary problems, as the new chemical mixture caused residue to build up on the cockpit windows, and a canopy washer was needed, which simply sprayed the washing fluid onto the canopy, and the slipstream did the rest of the work. Circuitry was also added to force the engine ignition system to continually fire while the gun trigger was being pulled, so that in the event a flameout occurred, the engine could rekindle its flame immediately. The GAU-8 Avenger is a monstrous machine designed to wreak havoc on those Soviet tanks attempting to push through Allied lines. To do this, they need heavy armor-piercing rounds. The rounds are truly massive at 30 millimeters, and sprinkled throughout these rounds are rounds made of aluminium with a depleted uranium core. Uranium is insanely dense at 19.1 grams per centimeter cubed. Lead, in comparison, is 11.3 grams per centimeter cubed, and iron is 7.9. This density gives the round more kinetic energy for armor piercing. The depleted uranium also ablates material underneath and self-sharpens the projectile. Tungsten mushroom out and dulls itself upon impact. There is currently 700,000 metric tons of depleted uranium stored as uranium hexafluoride in huge storage cylinders across America, costing uranium enrichment facilities a great amount in maintenance. They are simply delighted when someone gets it off their hands and fires it at high speed into a country thousands of miles away. It's a cheap and freely available resource and has the perfect material properties for armor piercing, but the efficacy of using depleted uranium is obviously not good. Many war-torn regions have blamed its use for elevated cases of cancer. The A-10 has been under constant threat of retirement. Detractors have pushed from the very start that the plane is not needed. First, it's the F-16 which should take over its job, and now it's the F-35. And both sides of the argument have valid points. The F-16 and A-10 can carry similar amounts of ordnance into the battlefield if needed. Both have 11 hardpoints with a carrying capacity over 7.2 tons, but attaching heavy equipment to its wings negates the biggest advantage of the F-16, its maneuverability and ability to conserve kinetic energy in dogfights. The F-16 was designed to be a multi-role fighter, while the A-10 was designed for one job and one job only: getting down and dirty and taking some punches like Rocky. While modern planes like the F-35 were designed to be more like Muhammad Ali, bobbing, weaving, elusive, striking and moving out of the enemy's range before they can react. The two planes were designed in completely different eras, with completely different military doctrine in mind, and trying to compare the two without acknowledging that is silly. The F-35 is designed to carry a small payload of weapons in its internal weapons bay, while stealth is a high priority, but it can carry just as much as the F-16 when air superiority is established. It's a multi-role fighter designed for the modern battlefield. Ultimately, the A-10 found a role in wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, where the threat level and sophistication of enemy weaponry was relatively low, like the battles expected in the Fulda Gap in the 1980s. The A-10 persists today because it excels in its role as a close air support vehicle, and its low cost of running compared to other military planes has kept it competitive, allowing it to be in the vanguard for military operations today. A plane the infantry can see coming over the horizon, like Gandalf arriving into Helm's Deep to lift the siege.
A-10 saving the day, campaign.
It's become an iconic aircraft among the soldiers on the ground. A bond has formed between it and the infantry it protects. But just as the A-10 was created in preparation for an anticipated next-generation war, the F-35 was created with future wars in mind, where the threat environment would be so dense that simply being able to take a punch won't save it. The nature of close air support has continually evolved over the past century. In World War II, tactical air forces were created specifically for providing close air support to the troops landing in Normandy on D-Day. Range for these fighters was a major tactical issue, and within 24 hours of the first men landing in Normandy, 3 new emergency landing strips had been created off the beaches, which would allow the Allies to extend their fighter-bomber range and prevent a fierce counterattack by the Germans from overwhelming the small toehold the Allies managed to carve out in Normandy. I explored these vital logistical challenges in a future episode of The Logistics of D-Day that will be out next month. These airfields were primarily built to extend the reach of Allied aerial support as ground troops pushed forward. However, as the front line progressed, many were converted to supply depots, emergency evacuation posts, and heavy bomber airfields. Others were simply abandoned and allowed to return to farmland over time. There are hidden traces of these remains littered all over Normandy. You can learn more about them and get access to the entire Logistics of D-Day series by signing up to CuriosityStream for just $19.99 for the entire year. Here, you can watch the Hidden Traces documentary about modern archaeological digs uncovering remnants of the 8-decade-old battlefield. And you will get free access to Nebula, the home of the Logistics of D-Day series, and many more original series from some of YouTube's best educational creators, like Tom Scott, Wendover Productions, and Tearsu. $19.99 for an entire year of access to CuriosityStream with thousands of award-winning documentaries and access to Nebula is a fantastic price, and will help educational creators to continue creating their content without the constraints of the YouTube algorithm. As always, thanks for watching, and thank you to all my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see more from me, the links to my Instagram, Twitter, subreddit, and Discord server are below. It's hard to explain the engineering marvel that is the SR-71 Blackbird, a long-range plane capable of flying 26 kilometers above the surface of the planet, so high that the pilots could see the curvature of the planet and the inky black of space from their cockpits. It flew so fast that the engineers had to develop entirely new materials and designs to mitigate and dissipate the heat generated from aerodynamic friction. Entirely unique engines were needed to function from 0 all the way up to Mach 3.2, dealing with the myriad of problems like cooling, fuel efficiency, and supersonic shockwaves interfering with airflow. A plane so advanced that when it detected a surface-to-air missile, its response was simply to change course and speed up. Even though the missiles had a higher top speed, they couldn't achieve the range and high-altitude maneuverability the Blackbird could. This allowed the SR-71 to run hundreds of missions through Vietnam, North Korea, and Iraq without ever losing an aircraft to enemy fire, despite multiple attempts. The entire plane was built around the propulsion system, which alone was a miracle of engineering design. For one, no turbine-driven jet engine can operate with supersonic flow at its inlet. Yet, this plane was powered by the Pratt & Whitney J58 turbojet engine. But get this, off the shelf, these engines could only provide 17.6% of the thrust required for Mach 3.2 flight, a speed which the SR-71 could cruise at for extended periods of time. How on earth did it manage that? In order to achieve those kinds of speeds, a ramjet is typically needed. A ramjet, as you can probably guess from the name, relies on ram pressure to operate. Ram pressure is simply the pressure that occurs as the plane rams itself through the air. So, as the engine moves through the sky, it funnels this high-pressure air inside. Before entering the combustion chamber, the supersonic airflow must be first slowed down. This basically acts like the compressor stage of a normal jet engine, elevating the air pressure before it enters the combustion chamber. Once the air enters the combustion chamber, it is mixed with fuel and ignited. It expands and accelerates once again out of the exit nozzle. With no moving parts, this type of engine is capable of flying at speeds far greater than a typical turbine-driven engine. But it cannot start from 0. It needs forward movement in order to achieve the correct compression of air in the combustion chamber. So, they are either dropped from a conventional plane, have a secondary propulsion system, or are a hybrid of a conventional jet engine and a ramjet, which is precisely what the SR-71 used. The turbojet J58 engine of the SR-71 is nestled inside the nacelle here. In front and around the J58 is a complicated system of airflow management. These control mechanisms allow the propulsion system to transition from a primarily turbojet engine to a ramjet engine in mid-flight. First, the Inlet Spike. It is capable of moving forward and back by 0.66 meters. This adjusts the inlet and throat area, which controls the airflow entering the engine. It also keeps the position of the normal shockwave at its ideal position between the inlet throat and the compressor. This is the most efficient position for the shockwave, as it minimizes the energy loss due to drag as air flows over the shockwave. The inlet spike stays in the forward position until Mach 1.6, After this point, it begins to move backwards by 41 millimeters for every 0.1 increase in Mach number, keeping the shockwave in its ideal position. The inlet spike contains perforations which connect to the outside of the nacelle through ducts. Initially, the airflow will come from the outside in to provide additional airflow to the turbojet engines. But once the plane hits about Mach 0.5, this airflow reverses. As the plane speeds up, the inlet spike develops a significant boundary layer of air. A boundary layer is a layer of very slow-moving air that clings to the surface of objects. By bleeding this layer of slow-moving air off the inlet spike, it frees up a greater area of the inlet area for high-energy, fast-moving air, and thus improves efficiency. Around the engine, there is a bypass area which takes air from the inlet and bypasses it around the J58 engine. This air was used to cool the J58, which again improved engine efficiency and allowed the plane to fly faster. After the air passes the engine, it rejoins the airflow just after the engine afterburner, adding additional thrust as more oxygen becomes available for combustion and increases the pressure through the ejector nozzle. Air got into this bypass area in a number of ways. There was a shock trap, otherwise known as the cowl bleed, located here, which again helped minimize boundary layer growth. There were sucking doors, located here, which only opened from Mach 0 to Mach 0.5 to add additional air to the bypass for engine cooling. Air from the aft bypass doors, located just before the J58 engine, also fed into the bypass. These, together with the forward bypass doors, which vented to the atmosphere, were used to control the pressure level in the inlet at the optimum level. If it was getting too high, a pressure sensor would trigger the forward bypass doors to open, allowing more air to exit the inlet, while the aft bypass doors were controlled by the pilot. These doors played a critical role in maintaining the position of the normal shock wave. If this was mismanaged, the engine would lose control of the normal shock wave and may even spit it out of the intake, resulting in a sudden power loss called an unstart, which would cause the plane to violently yaw in the direction of the faulty engine. If this happened, the forward bypass doors would open fully and the spike would move to the forward position to reduce back pressure and get the shockwave back into its normal position. Besides this bypass area that took air from the inlet and dumped it into the ejector, there were also 6 bypass ducts that took air from the compressor and dumped it directly into the afterburner. These ducts were the primary mechanism that transformed the engine from a turbojet into a ramjet. Afterburners are great. They significantly add to thrust without needing a whole lot of additional weight. They basically just inject fuel into the exhaust of the